few weeks ago I made a movie about making a table from an old oak log. When I came to edit this movie, I was dismayed that some of the files were corrupted and I couldn't edit the movie in the way that I intended to. My intentions were to show the method of how I form the castle joint at the top of each leg. So now I'm back in the small loft workshop, I thought I'd make a quick video demonstrating how I made these joints. To demonstrate this, I found in my offcut bin a piece of 2x2 and a piece of 2x1.5. My first action was to mark a face and edge marking on the 2x2 which represents the leg. Then mark the 2-inch depth of the rails from the top of the leg. Because this piece had come from the scrap bin, please excuse the screw hole at the top of the leg. My next task was just to mark out the geometry of where the rails and the leg met. The leg is 45mm square and the rails are 30mm wide where it meets the leg. When I centre the rail on the leg, this means I have approximately 7.5mm or just over 1/4 of an inch at either side. To demonstrate this, I mark it up the face of the legs and then across the top. Now it was time to turn my attention to the two rails. I ensured they were square and then added the face and edge markings. These will be used to reference from when I start cutting the tenons out on the bandsaw. The rails are 30mm wide, so I found the centre line, and then as I decided to make my tenon 12mm or 1/2 inch wide, I split the difference at the either side of this marking. I then could mark the length of the tenon, and in this case I wanted it protrude past the leg 20mm or around about 3/4 of an inch. Now I have these markings, I could set up my mortise gauge, because in essence a castle joint is just two opposing tenons. Using the face markings I'd applied earlier, I marked the tenons down the length of the stock from the mark I'd made previously and then across the edge grain. To the marking gauge lines I just added my pencil. Firstly, it makes the line stand out a little bit clearer, and secondly, I thought it was easy for you guys to see what I was doing. And the last piece of marking out was just to transfer the mortise joints from the rails onto the top of the leg. Once all this was done, then it was time to go to the bandsaw. My first task at the bandsaw is to cut out the mortise in the top of the leg. Firstly, I set my fence so my blade runs inboard of my markings, and then adjust the fence just to sneak up on the mark. Once I have dialed the fence in, I then make two cuts, one reference from the face and then turn 90 degrees and make one from the edge. I then move my fence 12mm and make two other cuts, again referencing from the edge. These then form the mortise. Now I can have a little bit of free hand fun just cutting out the excessive timber and trying to take as much out as I can before I finally clean it up with my chisel. Now I have my mortise cut, I can turn the attention to the two tenons on the rails. Firstly, I set the machine so I can create the first tenon cheek. I do this to both tenons. Then I set the machine to make the cut for the second cheek. And now, because I have that extra 20mm to play with, I can just take a small nick out and just try the joint to make sure it's nice and snug before continuing with the cutting. For the next stage I need a sharp chisel. I then clamp the leg to the bench and then chisel down each shoulder to make sure they are flush and parallel so the tenons will locate properly in the bottom of the mortise. To create the shoulders of the tenons you have a couple of options. On this example I cut it with the tenon saw. And once cut, I can try the joint together for the first time. And here I employ a little hack to make sure that both shoulders are level. Firstly, square the joint Then run your tenon saw off the leg down the shoulders in both sides. This will make sure you have a perfect joint with no gaps. The second option to cut the tenon shoulders is just to take the piece back to the bandsaw and nick them out there. Now we have both tenons cut, we can start to finally fit the joint together. Here I make a couple of discrete markings just so I know which way each component fits into the leg. It's at this point you can do the final dressing of the joint just to ensure you get a really snug and nice fit to all the joints. Once I'm happy that the two tenons fit perfectly into the mortise pockets, I can mark out the R-flap where the two tenons meet each other in the mortise pocket. To do this, I just insert each tenon in turn and then just mark a line inside the pocket, and then using my ruler just mark half of the depth of the tenon that is to be cut out. Here I'm just reminding myself and making a note to cut the outermost cut first. This is because when I made my table I had a couple of issues with the end of the tenons breaking off, mostly because I had splits on the end of the timber. And now it's back to the bandsaw to cut the R-flaps. Initially I cut these quite tight, and then I can just ease the joints out to ensure a perfect fit. Now all the main cuts are complete, I can take the whole thing back to the bench for assembly. And the final stage before sanding and gluing is just to add a little bit of bling to the joints. And this isn't totally necessary. You can actually cut the tenons flush with the out of the leg, or leave them slightly longer as I did with my table. Or in this instance I'm actually putting a mitre cut on the end just to add some detailing. And again, these two short cuts I performed at the bandsaw. Prior to gluing, I just give everything a really good sand up with my DeWalt sander. Gluing up this small sampler was a little bit tricky. Usually in a frame construction you've got something to clamp against, but here there was nothing to do that because I'd only made one leg. So I had to utilise some small blocks just to give me some clamping pressure. I applied a liberal amount of glue and just put the clamps on, and then left the joint ensuring it was square for about an hour. Right, time for a cup of tea. Now it was time to take the clamps off and see if the glue had set. All that was left to do was to clear the excess glue off and give it a final sanding. And there we are, a finished castle joint. It reminds me a bit of making joints when I was at college. If you found this video useful and would like to see some more joinery tips, then drop me a comment and like my video, and if you've not already subscribed, please do so. And until next time, bye.